Malibu, Ojai, San Pedro, Topanga. Places we may be familiar with, yet perhaps less so with their unique history. These names date back to the 1800s, when Alta California was the northernmost frontier of Spain and Mexico, and some 800 fabled ranchos occupied most of the west coast from San Francisco to San Diego. These ranchos became the blueprint for California, one of the most culturally diverse, agriculturally bountiful, and economically prosperous regions in the world. Rancho Rodeo de los Aguas, a small 4,500-acre rancho in the Southern California frontier, embodies the history of California. How the frontier land that became the rancho launched a series of international migrations and business ventures that turned an indigenous village into Beverly Hills, the epicenter of wealth and fame in the present U.S. The ranchos were originally Spanish land concessions or Mexican land grants awarded to military veterans and influential colonists. More than 13 million acres of land in California were seized from indigenous natives and appropriated to reinforce colonization. During their golden age, the ranchers thrived on cattle ranching, only to be splintered into new settlements and enterprises by the 1880s. No assumption is faultier than the idea of a frontier with vast uninhabited lands and primitive people. Since time immemorial, the Tongva have lived in the Great Basin area of Los Angeles. They called the land Tvagnar, the world, and themselves Tongva, people of the earth. Their remoteness protected them from mechanized European countries and allowed them to lead a peaceful life with strong clanship, rich culture, and vibrant commerce. A small Tongva village was at the site of Rancho Rodeo de los Aguas prior to Spanish arrival. Its villagers venerated the land for its abundance of freshwater, game, and grains year-long. After multiple excursions, Spain succeeded to colonize the Alta California frontier, bolstering the Spanish crown's hegemony in the North American frontier against other international powers. Based on the medieval Castilian hacienda system, the Spanish king owned all frontier lands, which he granted to missions and pueblos, along with the labor of indigenous natives. Yagna, the largest Tongva village, had to make way for El Pueblo de los Angeles, home of 44 pobladores of diverse ethnic mixtures from northern Mexico. The Tongva were taken from their villages and enslaved at Mission San Gabriel. Renamed Gabrielino, they were forced to give up their way of life and assimilate into Spanish culture in order to survive. The 1769 Spanish expedition traveled on down Wilshire Boulevard to arrive at the land where freshwater flowed from nearby canyons, and named it El Rodeo de los Aguas. One of the most significant events that reinforced Mexico's independent control of California was the secularization of the 21 Spanish missions in 1833, which splintered their vast land holdings into some 800 private land grants. While the Christianized mission natives were to be emancipated and receive half of the mission lands and livestock, the death of Governor Figueroa in 1835 prompted his successors to give away or sell the land. Without ancestral homelands to return to, indigenous natives were forced out of the missions.
When the missions passed over into the hands of the rancheros, the native people who lived there just stayed living there. But as time went on, some of the native Indians, especially the ones who were very skilled at certain jobs like being vaqueros, right, cowboys, they could go and hire themselves out to different ranches. They may work at one rancho and then for a couple of years and then go to another one, or they might go around seasonally when it's time to brand the cattle, let's say, and all that stuff. They go work at one ranch, finish up there, and then move on to another one. So they would normally be hired and either paid with cash, with money, or be paid with goods, like part of the beef or the hides, etc.
Rancho Rodeo de los Aguas was first granted to Sergeant Villa and his wife, Maria Rita Valdez, after his retirement from the military around 1820. They were descendants of the first pobladores of El Pueblo de los Angeles. After her husband's death and a brief tumultuous shared ownership with a male relative, Maria became the rancho's sole owner in 1838. She was one of 55 women who received Spanish or Mexican land grants and was able to claim her ownership because of the Spanish civil law that recognized women's equitable legal status in land holdings. As Mexican control in California diminished, Californian ranchos began trading directly with international markets. Increasing demands for hides and tallow helped rancho owners like Maria emerge as the new elite of Mexican California, whose immense wealth and festive life defined California's culture and economy. The westward expansion of America continued until the U.S. conquered Mexico's Alta California, the westernmost frontier. The victory of the Mexican-American War and discovery of gold in 1848 brought hordes of Americans to California. Many of them failed at finding gold and began looking at other businesses, especially farming. However, most arable lands already belonged to Mexican ranchos, whose titles were honored by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. From the perspective of Americans, the conquest of Mexico should have made all rancho lands public domain and available for settlement. Complicating the disputes were the lax legal conditions of the land grants awarded during the previous eras, vague boundaries, and poor documentation. Soon, American squatters began encroaching on ranchos and stealing livestock. In 1851, Congress voided the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo along with the 18 treaties with Native American nations. Mexican ranchos were given 2 years to present their ownership claim before a U.S. Land Commission.
They go after those ranchos, and probably what was most effective, either they bought them, or what was most effective and most devastating to Mexican Americans who had owned the land was they had a difficulty proving that land ownership in an American court system. So the challenges were a new legal system, new requirements for proving land ownership and where that land had come from, difficulty in providing deeds and things like that to the land. And then they were also navigating a legal system that was not only new, but they had to navigate it in a language that was not their own, right? They had to navigate a legal system in English. They would hire English-speaking attorneys to represent them in court to help them prove that their land grants and their ranchos were actually theirs. But unfortunately, many of those lawyers were very unscrupulous, and they were actually partnered up with Anglo settlers who wanted access to that land.
Similar to the indigenous natives before them, Mexican rancho owners were exploited by a new foreign power that had just conquered the western frontier. Maria Rita Valdez lost her rancho title paper during the Siege of Los Angeles in 1846. This created difficulty when she filed an ownership claim. In a hearing, she had to support her ownership with a crude, hand-drawn map and oral testimony by her relatives and friends. Despite the weak evidence, her ownership claim was confirmed in 1855, and the patent was finally granted in 1871. The Land Commission's liberal position, which often excused poor documentation and failure to perform legal conditions, helped Maria's claim. Even with the clean title, Maria faced a host of difficulties. Recurring droughts and floods killed off cattle and wiped out the grazing land. The plunging cattle price and the long legal process left Maria with little cash to pay taxes and modernize the ranch. Shortly after an Indian attack on her property, Maria sold the rancho for $1,300 to two Americans, Henry Hancock and Don Benito Wilson. By the 1860s, most Mexican ranchos shared the fate of Rancho Rodeo de Aguas, and their land titles were transferred to Americans. Soon after the official closure of the California frontier in 1890, Burton E. Green, the father of Beverly Hills and his famed realtor, Percy Clark, began developing luxury housing lots on the land of Rancho Rodeo de Aguas along the rolling hills of the Santa Monica Mountains. Real estate development in Hollywood transformed the remote, picturesque rancho into the enduringly glamorous Beverly Hills, where people continued to flock to pursue success, wealth, and fame. The California that we live in today looks nothing like the remote, desolate frontier that was once given away to entice settlers. The ranchers offered new opportunities and riches for the settlers and matching inequality for the indigenous natives. From native hunter-gatherers to immigrant cattle rancheros, from massive land grants to small private lands, and from civilization to colonization, the history of the ranchos has defined what California is today. A new frontier is emerging in California beyond its lands, expanding its boundaries to an ecological and technological frontier, where new dreams will rise and fall, which will further define what California will be.
Because so much of our geography and history is connected to the ranchos, the names, the towns, the names of families and streets, the way that property is divided and the way that real estate is dealt with in California. I think that's the biggest legacy. California's roots are in that rancho economy or in that rancho time period.